I used to work as a maid for some old lady for a couple of weeks when I was 20. She had a really big yet old house on a property that could have been beautiful if she had actually taken care of it. She had 2 acres of land surrounded by woods in 3 directions and the road on the other. The house itself was ancient, mostly made of wood, and the interior was really dark. She would often keep the blind shut in some rooms for reasons I didn't understand. I would sometimes open the blinds to let some sunlight in, only to find that she'd have shut them by the next time I entered the room. She lit some rooms by candle, which made the house seem even more prehistoric from the inside. To top it off, the wood floors were creaky as hell just about everywhere in the house. The woman's name was Mel. She was around 70 years old. The kind of work Mel would have me do would be mostly physical stuff that she couldn't do very well anymore, like sweeping, dusting, cleaning dishes, doing laundry, sorting mail, and other things of that sort. One weekend, Mel asked me to sleep there for a night or 2. The house had like 4 bedrooms, yet she lived alone, so it wasn't an issue. Well, this takes place over the course of a Friday, and technically a Saturday as well. I arrived as per usual on Friday, speaking very few words to Mel. I dropped my backpack full of my clothes and cosmetics onto the bed in the bedroom that I was going to be sleeping in. As I turned to the door, I saw Mel standing by the doorway. She had a creepy way about her, and this entrance was no exception. She didn't say hello, which wasn't as weird as it sounds. She just instructed me to clean the bedroom right away. After that, she just told me to simply straighten up the whole house, and then she went upstairs. I didn't see her for the rest of the day, but I would occasionally hear her walking around upstairs in her bedroom. It was weird, she would seem to walk back and forth. There were no TVs in this house, so I didn't know what she could have been doing. One thing that I found bizarre was how protective she was of her basement. She made it clear it was completely off limits and she didn't want me going down there. Nighttime came and I went to bed early. This was before smartphones were a thing, so I didn't even know what time it was. It was probably 9 or 10 o'clock though. For the first few hours everything was peaceful, however I still had trouble falling asleep given that it was the most uncomfortable bed I'd ever been in. It felt like hours later that I started hearing footsteps outside my room on the creaky floors. It sounded like Mel was passing my room really slowly. Maybe she was just going to the bathroom. A few minutes later, I heard her footsteps again, but then she stopped outside my door this time. I sat up and listened. I could hear the creaking from behind the door of Mel standing there, and it was starting to creep me out. She finally walked away. I heard her go down the stairs, and then I heard a door open and close from downstairs. I had a feeling it was the basement door. It was a while later that I heard the door open and close again, and then heavy, slow footsteps coming up the creaky stairs. The footsteps once again came to my door, then stopped. I sat up once again to listen, and I could hear creaks of pressure on the floor outside the door. And then I heard the doorknob start to turn. I laid back down and pulled the sheets over me and pretended to be asleep. I heard Mel take a few steps into the room, pause, and then leave. She went back to her room and shut the door. I was a bit disturbed. This was very bizarre behavior. I waited about half an hour before deciding I had to see what was in that basement. I got out of the rickety bed, tiptoed to the door, and then tiptoed down the stairs the best I could. I opened the heavy basement door, flipped on the lights, and crept down the stairs. I made it to the bottom step, and held in the urge to scream. There were 2 old wooden chairs dead center in the basement, and there were 2 of what I could only describe as decaying corpses with wigs on them sitting in them. The sight of a bug crawling on one of them made me want to puke even more. I brought myself to walk deeper into the basement, closer to the corpses. I had to make sure they were real. Both of the corpses had men's wigs on them. The bigger of the 2 also had a beret on. I don't know much about corpses or their rate of decaying, but I'd say these corpses were both almost a year old. I felt like my heart stopped momentarily when I heard footsteps coming from upstairs on the first floor. I couldn't make it to the light switch. I had no time. I hid behind one of the couches in the basement as I heard slow, heavy footsteps coming down one creaky stair at a time. I had my hands covering my mouth as I heard Mel reach the last stair. I heard her whisper my name. For half a second, I looked around the couch and saw Mel halfway across the basement already with a big kitchen knife in her hand. I knew she would be too slow to catch me, so I ran for it to the stairs. She screamed my name and followed as fast as she could. When I made it to the first floor of the house, I ran upstairs to the bedroom I was sleeping in to grab my backpack. By the time I ran back downstairs, Mel was at the top basement step. I ran out the front door and to my car. I turned it on, caught my breath, looked to the front door of the big old house, and saw Mel standing there. I drove off the huge property and down the road, making it back home within 10 minutes. Fortunately, I never gave Mel any of my information, such as my address or my phone number, so she was never able to contact me again. If I had to guess, I'd say one of those corpses belonged to her dead husband that she'd mentioned twice to me. As for the other, smaller corpse, I have no idea, but regardless, it was a disturbing scene to witness, and something was way off about that woman.
During a rainy night in Central Islip on Long Island, a teenager named Ian was home alone, so he invited his friend Carl over. His friend texted that he would be over in 2 minutes. Ian prepared the video games he planned on playing with Carl and heard the gate to the backyard close. Confused as to why Carl went out back, Ian went out to the backyard. His shed door was open with the light on. As he called out Carl's name walking to the shed, the light inside the shed turned off. Simultaneously, Ian received a text from Carl saying, "I'm here." Ian responded, "Are you in the shed?" He responded back, "I'm at the front door." As Ian looked up, the door to the shed pulled shut with force. Ian ran back into his house and let Carl in. When the police responded to Ian's call, they checked the shed, found the door was back open, and that nobody was inside. 22-year-old Garber still lived with his parents. He was the youngest of 3, so his 2 siblings had already moved out and his parents were out 3 to 4 nights a week. This one particular stormy night, he was home alone in his room when he could swear he heard something hit his window. It wasn't insanely weird, as the weather was pretty bad and something may have just blown into his window. However, a second thud at the window sent his heart racing. He lifted his blind and could see somebody standing out there. Even through the damp windows and the pouring rain, he knew he did not recognize that person. He shut the blinds to send the message to go away. However, he wasn't even able to move away from the windowsill before something else was thrown at the window. Garber opened the blind, and this time even the window, and shouted, "What do you want?" The man down below called back, "Come outside, I want to show you something." Garber went downstairs to call the police. They asked him if he was sure that he didn't know the person and if they had caused any damage. The 911 operator asked Garber to call back if the person continued to harass him or showed signs of wanting to break in. Garber hung up the phone. He wanted to see a better view from down in the kitchen, so he opened the kitchen blinds. Garber called the police right back and informed them that the man was standing at his kitchen window and to send somebody right away. The next time he looked back at the kitchen window, the man was gone. That was the last time Garber ever saw that man.
Me, my friend Sarah, and my best friend Canada needed to find something to do and somewhere to smoke. There are woods in a very short walking distance from Sarah's house, and us all being very adventurous 15-year-olds thought that would be perfect. We could smoke, then adventure the woods. Thinking back, I wish we would have smoked behind Sarah's house and just watched scary stories or some shit, but we didn't. When we made it to the opening that led into the woods that we went in, we adventured, we smoked, and overall, we had fun. and I wish this story ended there. You could clearly see anyone entering or exiting the woods from the streets. Sarah lives in a very nice neighborhood, except one house beside the woods that we were in. This house was old, and me and my friends often joked about how it looked like something out of The Hills Have Eyes. It was a rusty, blue tin house with pigs in the backyard. We were all on the path exiting the woods when we saw a bluish-gray Chevy pickup. The truck started up, and me and my friends jokingly decided to run away from it, and we were shocked to see the truck started following us. Every time we stopped, so did it. We took off running. There was a small hill that we hid behind so the truck couldn't see us. The truck passed, and after a while, we got up, laughed it off, and started walking out of the woods, thinking it was a joke. After about 5 minutes of walking, we started to approach the exit, but we were all struck with fear when we saw headlights blocking the exit. We looked at each other, wondering what to do. Upon looking into the truck, I saw that it was a larger-sized man in a hat and red shirt, but that was all I could see from that distance. In panic, Canada pulled out a small pocket knife. However, I didn't have much trust in her abilities to use it, so I took the knife as we all ran into the woods until we thought we were safe. We waited for a second, gathering our thoughts and our breath, and finally left the woods and went to Sarah's house. This happened at the end of our freshman year of high school. We are all in the middle of our sophomore year now, and we've since stayed away from those woods for months. On September 10th, however, we went into the woods one last time. It was Sarah's birthday, and again, we needed to find somewhere to smoke. There were 6 girls and 2 boys, so we thought it would be fine to go back into the woods, figuring safety in numbers. After entering the woods and walking for a while, we found a path. Me, Sarah, and Canada had seen the path before, but we never adventured it. To get to the path, you had to go down a small, steep hill. We all made it down the hill, and soon after came up to a fork in the path leading 2 ways. We chose to go left. It was a short trail which led to a small building that looked like it was abandoned before having been fully built. There was a wooden ladder, a small fire pit, but perhaps the oddest thing we found were the saws hanging by strings from tree to tree. Given that we were all stoned, perhaps we didn't take the findings as seriously as we normally would have. We decided to adventure down the right side of the fork in the path. Not far down the path, we found something truly horrific. There was a hangman-like structure, there was a noose on the ground, an old pair of shoes nearby, and a shovel. I'd never felt so uneasy in my life. We took pictures of everything, and we quickly left the woods safely, and I've made a personal promise to never go back into those woods. We believe the man who chased us in the pickup truck had something to do with what we found in the woods, and we were only more grateful after this that he didn't catch us. I'm 27 years old. I live alone in a rural town in Virginia, about 2 blocks away from my parents. My parents are both in their 60s, and my mom has become a very worrisome woman in her old age. Sometimes she walks over uninvited and lets herself in, since I had regrettably given her a key, which can get a bit annoying. Like if I would be out really late on weekends at a bar or with women, I would sometimes come home to my mom sitting in the living room waiting, worried sick. I know you may just think, oh my god, that's crazy, why not just put your foot down and tell her to stop? Well, because you don't know my mom. It's very hard to describe her, but she's the kind of worrisome, innocent little lady that you just can't bring yourself to go against. And I hate to mention, she also has mild dementia. Anyway, this was Saturday night. I think it was around 2 in the morning. I was at a nearby club with a group of college friends, really the only place to hang out in this boring town, and I was getting ready to head home. I said goodbye to all my friends and walked the 3 blocks it took to get back to my house. I walked up my front stoop in my drunken haze and dug my hand in my pocket for my keys. When I grabbed the doorknob, I realized it was unlocked. My mom was here again. I quietly opened and shut the front door, locking it behind me. I put my keys on the kitchen counter and found a note written in my mom's handwriting saying, "You forgot this at our house, next to the box of half-eaten cake my parents didn't want." I didn't see my mom anywhere, so I assumed she must have gone upstairs to sleep in the guest bed until I got back, which is something she would commonly do as well. Then I heard footsteps upstairs, confirming it, and that's when I sighed once again. 27 years old, almost 3 in the morning, and she still has to wait up and treat me like a child. I ran upstairs to check the guest bed, empty, along with all the bathrooms. I was afraid Mom was having one of her episodes due to her condition, so I ran to the phone to call my dad. After 4 rings, my dad picked up in a groggy voice, asking what the hell is the matter. After I told him that I heard Mom wandering around upstairs in my house, there was a short pause, and then he said, "That's not possible, she's sleeping right next to me." My mouth fell open as I turned my head to face the dark upstairs, and just barely by the light provided by the kitchen, I could see a head peering around from the corner at the top of the stairs, looking down at me. I screamed into the phone as I ran out the front door and down the street to my parents' house, explaining to my father on the way. About halfway there, my dad told me, "Alright, I'm gonna call the cops," and hung up. I made it to my parents' house, where my mom was already waiting at the door, worried sick. My mom explained that she did come over to clean my kitchen a little bit and to bring over the cake they didn't want. 2 police cars pulled up in front of my parents' house, where they escorted me and my dad down the street to my house. 1 officer stayed outside with us, while 2 others went inside to investigate. It felt like 15 minutes before they came back outside and said it was clear. They checked the crawl space, the attic, everything. There was really nothing for me to report, other than the door was left unlocked and I saw the outline of a head upstairs before I ran for it. Still, I didn't feel safe sleeping in there that night, so I went back to my parents' house. Me and my dad are certain that my mom simply forgot to lock the door when she left, as her memory has been getting worse over the past few months. My dad has been stopping her from coming over alone from now on, which makes me both sad but also relieved. Some nights, I still get paranoid that whoever was in my house that night never left, and is still hiding in here somewhere.
"45-year-old Chris was supposed to be working late for the night, so his family went out to eat dinner without him. However, he was unexpectedly able to come home early. As a result, he had the house to himself for a few hours. He went down to his man cave in the basement to watch TV. That was when he heard the backyard basement window flap open, and someone stuck their head inside, peering around the room. He hid behind the couch until the person shut the window. Chris ran upstairs with a baseball bat and shut off all the lights. He waited in the kitchen, which was by the back door. Somebody suddenly reached their arm through the pet door in an attempt to unlock the door. Chris swung the baseball bat as hard as he could at the person's arm, causing them to scream and flee. That same night, sirens roared down the street and stopped at a neighborhood house. It turned out one of Chris's neighbors 3 doors down had been murdered, and when his wife came home, she found the house was ransacked with missing valuables everywhere. And then she found her husband, dead on the kitchen floor with a stab wound in the back of his head.
When me and my troublemaking friends were 13 years old, one of the many rowdy and mischievous things we would do would be Saturday night ding-dong ditch sessions. 10 years ago, we all lived on the same block in a typical suburban neighborhood. At the time, there were a lot less houses and more woods though. I'm going to make up names for my friends for the case of this story. There was Mark, James, and Matt. Either Mark or James were usually the ones to go up to the houses and ring the bells. Matt and I, on the other hand, would usually find hiding spots right away. We hit about 5 or 6 houses. I remember all of the men who answered the doors gave pretty much the same reactions. They'd step out onto the stoop, 1 or 2 would yell something, and then they'd walk back inside. For a couple of houses, we'd ring the bell again for a better reaction. One guy yelled he was calling the cops the second time, so when he shut his door, we all booked it down the street and went to the next block over. As I mentioned, 10 years ago in this neighborhood, there were patches of wood sitting where houses sit today. On the next block over, there were a few patches of wood surrounding some of the houses, and the houses on this block seemed to be more unkempt. The first house on the block was across the street from a patch of woods, which made for a perfect hiding spot. The house was kind of run down looking, tall grass, a ratty old car with a cover on it in the driveway, and overall just a small house. Mark went up to ring the bell. He barely had time to make it across the street before the door opened. It was another man to answer the door. This guy really big, about 6 foot and stocky build. Unlike the others, he was furious immediately. He walked around his whole front yard checking the bushes, yelling threats. We all laughed as we always did. Eventually, he finally went back inside. Mark waited a few minutes, checked the windows, and then ran back up the stoop to ring the bell again. I didn't envy him with this house. I would not be bold enough to ring that man's bell again. Mark knew he probably didn't have as much time, so he ran to the side of the house and out of sight. The door opened much quicker this time, and this time the man came out with a rifle in his hand. We all looked at each other, simultaneously going, "Oh shit," under our breath. The man checked all the places he checked before, and then a few extra places this time, like behind his car, behind a couple trees, and then he walked to the center of his lawn and just stood there, as if he were thinking. He looked around, and then his head stopped as he was facing us in the woods. Me, Matt, and James looked at each other. We ducked lower in hopes that he didn't see us. After 10 seconds of staring in our direction, the man went back into his home. And then, we saw him appear at his front window, standing still like a statue, looking in our direction in the woods once again. We saw Mark creeping back over to the man's front door, but there was nothing we could do. We were too afraid to move or yell anything. Mark rang the bell once again and ran for it. The man didn't move though, at least not for another minute. Then he turned and walked away from the window. We didn't see Mark again, but we were still too nervous to move or say anything. The next thing I remember, we heard Mark's voice from across the street yelling, "Run." We didn't understand until we heard someone running up from behind us, realizing upon turning our heads that it was the man from across the street with his rifle in hand, pointed at us. We ran like little prey from a predator to Mark, who was waiting for us across the street. We ran for blocks until we were sure we lost him. Mark explained that he yelled when he saw the man sneaking across the street into the patch of woods with his gun. We didn't report him or any of what happened. We just told a few friends and that was it. Luckily the house was many blocks from us, so we never really had to pass it again.
A young girl named Anne was home alone one snowy Friday night. Her parents were out to dinner, and her sister was out with friends. She was taking a nap on her bed. She awoke to the thump. She was sure it came from her closet door, so she got up and bravely opened it. There didn't seem to be anyone inside, so she closed the closet and spun around. There she saw the head under the bed, the head of a man looking at her with an expressionless stare. She fell to the floor screaming. That's when the closet doors behind her opened and someone grabbed her and pulled her in. The man from under the bed emerged and approached her as she was being held down. The two of them carried her downstairs where they put tape over her mouth and tied her arms together. One checked to make sure the coast was clear before carrying her outside, where they planned to put her in their car's trunk. However, about halfway to their car, a large group of teenagers came riding down on their bikes and witnessed it all. Some of them were screaming for help, while some of them got off their bikes and started to slowly approach the two men. They knew they wouldn't get away with it now, so they dropped Anne, jumped into their car, and sped away. She was completely awake and conscious throughout all of this. It's unknown why they didn't just tie her up while she was sleeping. The most realistic possibility is that they simply wanted to scare the girl. This may seem like a crazy, rare occurrence, and you may even call it fake. However, things like this happen all the time and are shown commonly on the news. Perhaps they're just the stories we forget about.